Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about school traffic management hosted by Green Communities Canada. We'll be keeping everyone in the audience on mute throughout the webinar. If you have any technical issues or problems with audio quality, please use the chat box and send your message to everyone. We'll be tracking the chat box throughout the webinar. We are also recording this webinar and will make the slides and recording available on our website. Okay, so welcome again. My name is Selena Churro, and I am the project coordinator for Ontario Active School Travel, a program of Green Communities Canada. Green Communities Canada is a national association of community organizations that work to reduce our impact on the environment. We have been a leading organization promoting active school travel since 1996. We do this through research, advocacy, training, educational resources, events, partnerships, and on-the-ground programming. A little bit about Ontario Active School Travel. Ontario Active School Travel is the new program name for Green Community Canada's work to promote active school travel, which was previously branded as Active and Safe Routes to School. Our goal for the Ontario Active School Travel program is simple: to make walking, cycling, and other forms of active and sustainable transportation the norm for school trips. The Ontario government has provided Green Communities Canada with $3.5 million over 3 years to take active school travel to the next level in the province from October 2017 through to August 2020. With our new brand, Ontario Active School Travel, we have also updated our website and launched new social media channels for the Ontario Active School Travel program in April. Please connect with us on these platforms to keep informed of tools, resources, and funding available to support your work. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and if you post a photo or a story about active school travel in Ontario and take it with the Ontario at Ontario AST during June and July, you could win a prize. In addition to our social media channels, we also have our monthly newsletter. To stay in the loop with active school travel news and events, sign up for this newsletter. You can do this using the form at the bottom of our news website. We are keen to share inspiring stories from your community in the newsletter, so please send your local active school travel news to our communications coordinator, Vanilla Hood. Her email is provided at the bottom of the slide. Okay, so to introduce our speaker today, titled Making School Zones Safer, Partnership-Based School Travel Planning, our presenter is Laura Zeglin, who works for Green Communities Canada as a school traffic management facilitator. Laura works closely with school communities in Toronto to identify barriers to active and sustainable school travel, particularly with regards to the built environment, and to collectively come up with solutions and plans of action to overcome these barriers. Laura has a background in education and public health. She has trained and worked as a teacher in New Zealand and holds a master's degree in education and public health policy from the University of Toronto. Her public health research includes exploring how the journey to school intersects with considerations of socioeconomic background, geography, and gender. Now I'll hand over to Laura for the presentation. There will be time at the end of the presentation for questions and discussion. Please use the chat box to submit your questions and to send to everyone.
All right, thanks very much, Selena, for that introduction. I'm just going to switch over to start sharing my own screen. Just give me a second while I figure this out. All right. So we're going to start from this slide here. So I'm very excited today to be able to share some of the work that's happening in the city of Toronto around not only school traffic management, but promotion of active school travel in general. There's been a number of important stakeholders and partners who've really come together. There's been a lot of momentum that's been happening over the last year especially, that's allowed us to make some significant gains towards the work happening here in the city. So I'm happy to be able to share that with you today. So as Selena mentioned, we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. And depending how we do with our time, I would love to hear some examples from other municipalities as well in terms of some of partnerships and models that have worked for you, if we have time. All right, so I often like to start my presentations with this slide because I think the stats, they're not surprising for any of us who have ever been to a school zone during drop-off or pickup time. You know, anecdotally, we know that less kids are walking to school today than did in the past. But the data also bear out these same results as well. Now, this is data specific to the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, but I suspect that it's similar in other parts of the province and the country as well. And what we see is significant decreases in the number of children walking to school over the past 30 years, and at the same time, significant increases in the number of children being driven to school. There's a number of reasons behind these trends. We're not going to delve into those today, but nevertheless, it's a concerning trend for a number of reasons, one of which is traffic congestion around school sites. So there's many different reasons that traffic congestion is problematic. One is the opportunity costs of children missing out on important opportunities that come along with the active journey to school. So they're missing out on opportunities for exercise, you know, mental health benefits associated with time spent outside being active, and also missing out on the opportunities to develop independent mobility where they learn how to navigate their own neighborhood in a way that's safe. Instead, many children now are being passively transported from point A to point B in a vehicle, and they're not getting to have those opportunities along the way. Another piece that's not talked about as much, but is nevertheless important, is the degraded local air quality. So when we have more and more cars being packed into these small spaces around schools, particularly, well, not particularly, just in general, but I was going to say some school sites were never even designed to have a lot of car traffic because they were neighborhood schools. They were intended that kids would be walking to school. You know, we've got all these cars packed into this space that, you know, at certain times of day, there's very high concentrations of pollutants in the air that actually impact children a lot more significantly than they impact adults, just because they're still young, their lungs are still developing, and that's something that I don't think it's talked about enough. But probably in the city of Toronto, the thing that's really led to the most of a call for action has been related to safety concerns. So with too many cars in a given space, it can lead to driver frustration and dangerous driver behaviors. People try to get creative, that there's nowhere to park, so maybe they'll double park or they'll park on the far side of the street, and children are forced to cross mid-block in between other parked cars, which is a dangerous situation. Sometimes there's speeding, other dangerous drivers that can result from just the frustration of there being too many cars. But congestion can also make it harder for drivers to see children. So even if they're not doing anything dangerous, it can still present a dangerous situation around school zones for drivers and children alike. So as I mentioned, in the city of Toronto, probably what's been the most galvanizing force around wanting to really focus on school zone safety and promoting active school travel has been around, this has been a relatively recent spike of children actually being killed on the way to or from school in their school zones. Obviously something that you never want to see or hear about, and unfortunately, I won't say it's taken this for the city to start taking action, but it's definitely been a motivation for a variety of stakeholders to recognize this as something that really needs, that we need to take action on. But it hasn't just been the spike in student deaths recently that's the whole reason for things happening. There have been things happening over time. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context to how some of the different partners in the city of Toronto have been focusing in their own ways on support for active school travel. And this is only going back to 2013. This doesn't include any of the work of other nonprofits, including Green Communities Canada, who've been really promoting this and providing resources and supports for this for several years prior to 2013. But I just wanted to start at 2013 with some of the more kind of official policies that started to be developed. So one was in fall of 2013, the Toronto District School Board, which is the largest of 4 school boards in the city of Toronto. Their Board of Trustees approved a charter for active, safe, and sustainable transportation. And I don't have it here on this slide, but the Toronto Catholic District School Board also around a similar time came up with their own charter for active transportation as well. Then in June of 2014, Charter Implementation Plan was developed and approved, and the TDSB began to support what they called active, safe, and sustainable transportation more fully in schools. And then fast forward to 2017, so winter of last year, the City of Toronto launched its Vision Zero Road Safety Plan. And now this wasn't specifically focused on school zones. They have 6 different emphasis areas that all focus on different types of vulnerable road users. But this became a bit of a launching point for the momentum to start to grow. So as you'll see, there's a number of other things that then follow in 2017. So in February of 2017, there was a report on improving school traffic management that was received by the Board of Trustees at the TDSB. And then in May, the trustees motioned for the city to establish a task force on traffic safety in school zones. Then in September of 2017, the City of Toronto officially launched its Vision Zero school safety zones. So as I mentioned, Vision Zero as a road safety plan is broad. It encompasses all road users, but in September of last year, they began to put a lot more focus on the school zone piece. And then in November of last year was the launch of the TDSB School Traffic Management Program. So that's the program that I'm the facilitator for, that I do on the ground work with schools in. And that's a partnership between the TDSB and Green Communities Canada. So that launched very recently, just in November of last year. Then in March of this year, the City of Toronto announced additional school safety measures, including expansion of school safety zones to a greater number of schools. So initially when they launched their school safety zone program, it was only going to about 20 schools per year. And now they're looking to install in 80 schools per year, with the intent to be to install these school safety zones in all schools across the city. But just given the sheer number, they have to start somewhere. And I'll talk a little bit more about those school safety zones shortly. So the TDSB Traffic Management Program is a partnership with Green Communities Canada, and right now it's a 3-year pilot. So as I mentioned, we just started in November of this year. We're just wrapping up year 1 of our program. We'll be rolling into year 2 in the fall. And currently we're working with 15 schools per year. Right now there is talk about wanting to expand the program, but currently we're 15 schools per year with 1 facilitator working with those 15 schools. And it follows the school travel planning model. So for those of you not familiar with it, I'll touch on that briefly in a few slides. And if you weren't able to join us on our May 31st webinar presented by Stephanie Hahn, there's a more in-depth description of the school travel planning model, and you can find that on the Ontario Active School Travel website as well. But I'll just touch on it briefly to give some context. So right now, all the year 1 schools, so 3-year pilot, year 1 schools are the ones who we're just finishing up with now. Right now, they're all aligned with the City of Toronto school safety zone. So every one of the schools that I'm working with as a facilitator is also a school that was either selected by the City of Toronto to get a school safety zone, or the City of Toronto has agreed to install a school safety zone because we're doing this program in their school. So we've got this very close working relationship with the City of Toronto. And also with Toronto Police Services, who are an agency of the City of Toronto. And the school traffic management program includes a number of pieces, such as detailed and in-depth evaluations of school sites and surrounding neighborhoods. So it goes a little bit more in-depth than the traditional school travel planning model, where some of these pieces might be optional. These are all standard parts. So we do a detailed checklist where we look at the school site itself, and then also looking at the streets around the school. And then we do the neighborhood walkabout, where we bring along our committee of stakeholders who are involved. And then we do traffic observations both in the before and after school period. And this distinction is important because the challenges and some of the patterns that we see before and after school, they're different. So it is important to do the observations of both. And it's important that in terms of the site audit, we're looking both at the school property and on the streets surrounding the school, because it's actually different stakeholders who are responsible, right? Because we've got the private property, which is owned by the school board, and then the city property, which is owned by the city. So in terms of being able to identify where specifically there's an issue in terms of who we follow up with to take action on it. We also do route map planning as an education tool. So again, this is something that's an optional piece of school travel planning, but we do it as a mandatory and standard piece of the school traffic management program, showing what we call popular routes to school based on data that we got from local transportation consortium. of where students live. So we try to connect these routes to where we have the greatest clusters of students living and showing what's a 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute walk to school, trying to direct them along the safest routes, where there's protected crossings and things like that. And then also an important piece is action planning, obviously, to reduce traffic congestion and increase rates of active school travel. And that's very much the same as the process in traditional school travel planning. So as I mentioned, Vision Zero is also an initiative of the City of Toronto, and they have 6 emphasis areas. So one of those emphasis areas is school children. And they're rolling out what we call school safety zones to increase driver awareness in front of schools. And these locations, eventually they want to do it across the whole city, but right now they're prioritizing it based on evidence-based criteria. So one of those pieces of evidence is that the school is located near a high collision cluster in the city. So they've been drawing on data from Toronto Police Services to make those distinctions. Now they're currently looking to see what other data is out there to get maybe some more robust criteria for setting up or for deciding upon which sites are really the highest need. But right now, that's what they're working with. And they're also looking at the size of the school catchment area. So they really want to focus on schools where a majority of students or a high number of students live within a reasonable distance to be able to walk or bike to school. Because the promotion of active school travel is an important piece, but obviously it's more difficult to do if students are being bused in from far away. All right, so this is a bit of a messy looking slide, so I'm not better with my graphics. But this is just my kind of crude attempt to demonstrate some of the different players who are involved and where they overlap. I'm definitely missing some people in here. But I've highlighted some of the key ones as it relates to the school traffic management program. So I also have Green Communities Canada as a separate stakeholder, even though I work for Green Communities Canada, because there's back and forth between our program and Green Communities in terms of developing resources and support for active and safe school travel. And then the City of Toronto is really one of the biggest partners. So I've given them the big bubble there. So the 2 departments in particular that have been especially involved have been transportation services. So they're in charge of the engineering piece and the rolling out of the school safety zones, and also public health. So public health, in the City of Toronto, we're fortunate that every school is assigned a public health nurse, often more than one public health nurse. So this is a resource that we're really working closely with. We're really capitalizing on the fact that we have these public health nurses in every school, and how can they support the programs that we're doing. And then the Toronto Police Services have also been a newer, I don't want to say newer, but they've become more involved in a more direct way with safety around school zones. So they've been quite involved with the City of Toronto in terms of aligning efforts, where enforcement should happen. As I mentioned, the City of Toronto is using their data to decide where these school safety zones should go. But they've also been working with the school traffic management program to help develop some resources for programming in schools. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit with an example. All right, so I did want to do a quick poll, speaking of stakeholders, to get a feel for who is here on the call today. So I believe Selena is going to pull up a poll that should show up on your screen in just a moment. There it is. So please take a moment to put which category you think best fits your organization, so we can get a sense of who's here on the call today. It'll give me a chance to take a bit of a breather. It's interesting so far. It looks like we have quite a nice mix. All right, so thanks very much everyone for submitting your votes. So yeah, we got nearly a third. Those of you are from public health. But yeah, a good mix of other stakeholders as well. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from you towards the end of the presentation as well, or in the Q&A session. Okay, so just a very quick recap of the school travel planning model. So as I mentioned, if you're interested in learning more about this, we do have the webinar that was given at the end of May is available on our Ontario Active School Travel website. And you can also go there to see our toolkit and our newly updated guide documents as well. But just in a nutshell, it's a holistic and site-specific approach to promoting active and safe school travel. So it's not just sort of about giving general resources that are made for a general audience. It's about really delving in to understand what the issues are at a specific school site, and with the partners who are at that school to come up with people who have the power to actually do things, and not just, you know, the idea of people. We need both. And also for long-term sustainability of the program. So, you know, as I mentioned, I work with 15 schools per year, but next year there's going to be a new 15 schools who are being worked with, and it's just going to be very sort of light touch support with those year one schools. So we really need to engage these stakeholders in the first year as we're developing the program, so that the program doesn't just kind of end and fall apart once, you know, my regular meetings with the school end. So the component, or any good action plan, has to have a range of components that we call the 5 E's. I know some municipalities also use a 6th E called equity. So even though we don't have that as a specific E, you know, at Green Communities, we kind of decided that that's something that should be integrated into all these other 5 E's, that we have equity considerations happening throughout the process. And as I mentioned, you know, different stakeholders are better suited to address different parts of the action plan. So I have GCC there for evaluation, education, and encouragement. But then, you know, there's others who are better suited, or whose partnership we need to do an effective job on the other components of the action plan. So now I just wanted to take a few moments to go through some examples of important partnerships that we've developed, not just necessarily over the past year, but that have definitely been instrumental to the success of the program so far. So one is with Toronto Public Health. Now, this is one example of an organization that Green Communities has had a working relationship with for several years. So this is not a brand new thing, but the City of Toronto, being officially signed on with this Vision Zero road safety plan, has also now brought Toronto Public Health under its wing as part of that mandate, which has been really useful, because now you know, it's kind of mandated from above, as well as, you know, just in kind through the partnership, that public health nurses have a role in helping to engage school communities. So this example here is at one of my schools in North York. And the school was hosting a health and wellness night. This was back in May. And the public health nurse at that school had been working, partnered with the teacher at that school to run a peer leadership program that had been meeting, I think it was once a week for about 2 months. And the students were talking about pedestrian safety and cyclist safety. And it was really great. So they had this table at this event back in May, where, you know, the public health nurse was there, but really it was the students who were doing all the talking, and they had their display materials there. They were answering questions that people had. They had some activities there to draw people over to the table, and some free swag, which is always a good draw. But it was very effective in terms of students and parents also being interested to hear the message, much more effective than if it was just me, you know, standing there with a booth on my own or giving a presentation. And now those students they can be ambassadors for the school going into future years. So Toronto Transportation Services, obviously a very important partnership as well. So I talked about the school safety zone. So this is what we're looking at when we're looking at the school safety zone. So it's a number of different features that are really designed to draw driver attention to the fact that, hey, you're going through a school zone, don't drive too fast, watch out for kids, but also some measures that are intended to make it easier for pedestrians. So for example, enhanced pedestrian crossing or crosswalk markings, and increased pedestrian walk times and advanced screen for pedestrians. And that's put down as optional because it depends on whether or not the school actually has an intersection or something that's relevant. Now, right now, this is just in the 150 meters along the school frontage, so it doesn't go all the way into the school neighborhood. But they're looking into piloting, kind of extending it out beyond just the immediate frontage of the school, and I'll talk about that in another example in just a couple of minutes. But Toronto Transportation Services has also been working with Toronto Police Services as part of this as well to facilitate data-driven enforcement. And also they're working on automated speed enforcement in school zones as well. So that's something that they're looking to have rolling out in the not too distant future. So again, these are important built environment features that really complement nicely with the education and encouragement work that schools are doing to try to promote active school travel. And we've had a bit of a back and forth relationship in terms of, because all of the schools that I'm working with are also schools that are getting these school safety zones, I have the opportunity to discuss with the school community, to give that feedback back to the city in terms of the placement of some of these pieces. Oops. Right, another is partnership between Toronto Student Transportation Group and TDSB facilities with our program. So Toronto Student Transportation Group is the consortia that organizes the school busing, but just student transportation in general in the city of Toronto. So they're not just specific to the TDSB, but TDSB is one of the boards that they cover. So they have been able to provide data on where in the school, well, first of all, the borders of the school catchment areas to us for our mapping, and also to map out where students live in the neighborhood. So it doesn't give addresses, but we can see where the clusters of student residences are, so we know, okay, where are students actually coming from to get to this school. And then we work together with the committees at the different schools. The example I have here in the picture here, this was something we did as part of one of our walk to school day events at one of the schools, where we actually had the kids draw, well, how do you get to school? It was a bit of an engagement piece because it was a good learning opportunity for them to learn how to read a map. And we could see, what are where are the thickest lines, where are most kids traveling along. And then we're also working with the TDSB facilities to create these maps for all of our schools. So the example I have here is not actually one of the ones that we're working with. This was an example I actually got from Hamilton, because ours are still just in their final stages of development. But the great thing about these maps is that they're going to be used not only as a communication tool for the school and something that they can now have over the long term, even once the program has formally ended. It's also something that's being housed by TDSB facilities. So in terms of their own site planning, they can see, okay, well, this is what we've promoted as the ways that students should walk to school, the access points to the school. So in terms of further, development plans or what have you, they can be consistent in terms of, not unintentionally doing something that would disrupt, what we're trying to promote at the school in terms of how students should try to access the school. Another important partnership is with Toronto Police Services. So the city of Toronto, because it's so large, doesn't just sort of have one central, it does have a central police services, but in terms of how the operations happen, it's separated out into a number of divisions across the city. And currently, it's, there's certain things that are standardized, but in terms of engagement with school communities, it's been very division specific in terms of, who happens to be working in that division, are they interested in doing certain things, and what's the relationship with the local schools. So in my experience as a school travel planning facilitator, I'd seen some cool examples in certain police divisions, and then, try to bring them to new police divisions. And but each time I had to kind of sell them on it and explain what it was about. So I had the opportunity to work with one of the managers who oversees all the divisions And we're currently working on developing a resource for one specific program as a starting point. It's called the Fake Ticket Program. I think it's also been called the Student Stop Speeders Program, depending where in the city it's been run. But basically, the local police come out. They work with a group of students, so it can be a class. Sometimes it's a group of students in some sort of extracurricular club. And they actually get a chance to use the radar gun to catch speeders in their school zone, and then they can pull over so the police pull over whoever was speeding, and then the children go up to the driver and explain to them, this is how fast you're going, this is the ticket that you would have gotten, this is why it's dangerous, as a student you're putting my safety at risk. And it's in every instance that we've done it, it's been a very overwhelmingly positive engagement experience, both for the drivers, because undoubtedly they're now going to wherever they're going next. Like, well, you won't believe what happened to me on the way here. I got pulled over by this kid. I would have got a ticket, but I just got a warning instead. But then the kids love it, the teachers love it, and it's good engagement opportunity for relationship building with the local police as well. And I'll speak to one other example as well. So this is not one that I've been directly involved in, but Toronto Police Services have also been working with Toronto Public Health to provide some educational resources so that if schools are looking for police to come out and give a safety presentation, say about pedestrian safety or cyclist safety, that they'll have sort of standardized materials that they can draw from, and they're not having to come up with it on their own each time that they get a request from a school. So again, just building this capacity for more different partners across the city to be involved in this work. So it's not all falling on individual champions at individual schools. This one I'm particularly excited about, and we're looking to launch this in the fall of 2018. And this is based on a model that came out of the region of Waterloo, where they did these they didn't call them extended school safety zones. That's what we're calling it in City of Toronto. But basically, so taking those routes that we've mapped out, the popular routes to school, and then putting some activities on the sidewalks along the way to make it fun and engaging for kids. Also signage throughout the community to say, you're at the 5-minute walking mark to your school, or the 2-minute cycling mark, and also for the 10-minute walk. And at some schools, we've got a 15-minute walk. So we're currently piloting this at 3 schools, and we're also working with a research team as well from SIT Kids who are doing the evaluation of this. We want to really get some good data to see whether or not it's been effective in impacting people's attitudes towards active school travel. But yeah, so the plan is to launch this in the fall. So I've been working closely with Toronto Transportation Services and Toronto Public Health, both in terms of identifying where these routes should be. And so far, all the routes are going to be at schools that are part of the school traffic management program, because we have data on those schools based on the work we've done there so far. We know their walking rates versus the number of students that live within walking distance to school. So we tried to identify those schools where there was a significant opportunity gap, where say 70% live within walking distance, but only maybe 25% are reporting that they regularly walk to school. Okay, well, this is a school where maybe we could have some sort of an impact. We're not going to try to do this at a school where we're already at capacity and everyone's walking already. At the same time as we're doing these extended school safety zones, we're also working on an education campaign to go along with it. So the education campaign will include resources for the classroom, so links to curriculum for teachers, and also some extracurricular resources if they're doing work through, say, an eco club or a mental health club, something like that. And then we're doing a series of radio ads that are going to be targeted to drivers during the morning and afternoon school travel periods. And then what was the other piece? Oh, and then we're doing a brochure as well as part of the general Vision Zero, but specific to school zone safety. So in terms of challenges and lessons learned so far, most of these, I guess, are more lessons learned than challenges. We've been lucky that because there's been momentum, we've had resources available, both in terms of finances, time, and people's experience, right? Normally, this can be a barrier to these kind of partnerships, where you might have individuals from different organizations across the municipality or wherever who are interested, but it's not their mandate to focus on this. So we've been lucky that, you know, with Vision Zero and money that the city has allocated towards this, that now we have people from different divisions who all have a role in making school zones safer, all now have it as part of their mandate. So that's been a real benefit to this program. Many stakeholders have been doing related work, but many without official mandates to do so up until this point. So we've recognized that there's been a lot of overlap and gaps in services. So for example, you know, multiple people creating resources that are saying the same things, but no one really being aware that other people have created those same resources. Meanwhile, there's areas where, you know, no one's really addressing it. And so now it's been a bit of an opportunity to recognize where some of those overlaps and gaps in services are now that we have more stakeholders at the table. We've also recognized that there's a need for standardization of processes and protocols across organizations and city departments. So basically just, I mean, one example could be with the school safety zones. So the City of Toronto is rolling those out across the city. But then on our walkabouts, we might identify something that's not part of that standard school safety zone. It's maybe something like we want to put in a pedestrian crossover here because we know a lot of people are crossing mid-block here. It's too far to either end, like to the next safe crossing. So we really want to install this, and then going through different departments, maybe they are not, you know, aware of Vision Zero, or they're not at part of the Vision Zero team, and they're like, oh well, that doesn't work to put here. So we're working on building that standardization so that the different parts of these big organizations within the city and different organizations are all kind of on the same page, so we can work more seamlessly towards our shared goals. So where we're at now, well, I said we have a working group. There's actually a number of working groups that are including multiple stakeholders that meet regularly to update on progress and align our efforts. So again, addressing that, you know, barrier, that challenge of having overlaps or gaps in resources. Now we have more of an open dialogue going to know, you know, what's happening with different stakeholders and what's available. And it's been great for me in terms of my role as a school traffic management facilitator, that I can be like, oh, well, like it would be, you know, the police example. It'd be really great if we can do these programs across the city, not just at certain divisions, and having the opportunity for that direct communication with the Toronto Police Services. And they could say, okay, that's a great idea. Let's move forward on doing that. So there's been a lot of momentum and political appetite to invest time and resources into this. So that's been definitely to our benefit in the City of Toronto. City and police have expanded the scope and expedited the rollout of safety measures related to the school zone safety. They're also, well, the school boards are looking to expand school travel planning and the school traffic management program. So I didn't mention it on this slide, but the Toronto Catholic Board is also looking to be able to expand their program as well. So they're, you know, seeking funding from the city for that. So it's, at this point, it's still too early to evaluate success. As I mentioned, the school traffic management program just started in November. So right now we're just kind of getting our process solidified and establishing those partnerships. But it's been a really exciting year in terms of the discussions and the planning that's been happening, and I'm really looking forward to where it's going to go. So that's it for me. So I look forward to hearing your questions and to having some discussion.
All right, thank you, Laura, for sharing with us how we can make school zones safer. This has been very informative with your on-your-ground examples. So if you guys can just type your questions in the chat box, we have some time to answer. We have one question from Jessica. Is the information about extended safety zones available on the Active and Safe Routes to School websites?
I don't believe that specifically is on the Active and Safe or the Ontario Active School Travel website, but it should be available on the City of Toronto's website. So if you look under their Vision Zero, you should be able to find information about their school safety zones. I don't think there will be information yet about the extended school safety zones, just because we're still working out the details of that, and the official launch of that is going to be in the fall.
We have another question with a comment. I am so glad to see the footprint in 5-minute to school signs. We are often discussing how to increase active transportation to decrease the congestion. Do you feel it was necessary to make the area as safe as it can be before promoting the active travel piece?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part of the question.
Do you feel it was necessary to make the area as safe as it can be before promoting the active travel piece?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it's sort of one of those like chicken or the egg things, right? Like, are you gonna wait until it's safe before you start to promote active school travel, or are you gonna recognize that having less cars helps make the area more safe? I mean, part of what we did have to do as part of the evaluation process, and this was something more that transportation services and their engineering team took on rather than me, is they looked at what our proposed routes were to make sure that there were no obvious safety risks along the way. So I know they were working with the guidelines provided by Waterloo in terms of where were the best places to put the different activities. Like, obviously you don't want to put it across the bottom of a driveway where a driver might be backing up, not see child. It's recommended that you do it on a sidewalk. Like for the sidewalk activities, it's recommended that's on a sidewalk that's actually separated by a boulevard from the road, so the kids aren't too close to the road. At one of our sites, we that wasn't an option just because of the design of that neighborhood. There was no separation, so instead we just chose to use like less jumping activities and more walking related ones, or counting or what have you. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it has to go hand in hand. You can't just put it someplace that's where there's an obvious risk. But at the same time, if we wait for the environment to be perfectly safe, we're never going to be able to move forward. So we have to assume, I guess, like a little bit of a risk. But if there's anything that's really glaring, obviously, then that gets addressed first. Good question.
Okay. So another question, can you share the resources for the classroom document?
Which classroom document was that?
Kayla?
Oh, the one related to the pilot that we're doing in the City of Toronto. If it's that one, we are planning that we're going to make it available online. So we're just in the process of developing it right now. But yeah, the idea is that it would be available online so anyone could access it. So yeah, definitely that can be shared. They'll be coming out in the fall.
Okay. Another question from City of Ottawa. How does the 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit that has been discussed in Toronto fit into this? Has there been any discussion about the concept of car-free zones in the block around schools?
So related to the 30-kilometer-per-hour piece, that's something that there's been some discussion about lately, and this has been more outside of what I've been directly involved in. It would be more a question for transportation. But I know there has been discussion about trying to make it easier. So I talked about like standardization of processes. And right now, the way it currently works in the City of Toronto is that there's like a very specific process that needs to happen for a street to be changed to a 30-kilometer-per-hour zone. It's not standard across the city that all residential streets do have that, or that school streets with schools have that. So they're working on standardizing that process to make it easier. What was the second part of the question?
Second part, has there been any discussion about the concept of car-free zones in the block around schools?
Yes, so not official discussions at the city level, as far, at least none that I've been privy to. That idea has definitely come up at a few of my schools. Right now, I think it's, and this is just my personal opinion, right now I think it's very difficult. I think city councilors would be very worried about the pushback that they would get for something like that. And also then there's the whole enforcement piece of how to, you know, actually make sure that people aren't driving through the school zone, especially if there's bus routes or a school bus, or, you know, for considerations of accessibility as well. Like perhaps you have students who come in a wheel-trans bus, or, you know, don't have the capability to walk all the way to the front door of the school. You need to still allow some vehicle access through. But yeah, that's not something that's really being rolled out in any serious way in the city of Toronto right now. It's more just an idea that's come up. But I'd be really curious to hear if that's been successful in other municipalities, and if so, how you kind of went about that.
So I think you've already answered this, Laura, but we have another question from London after Safe Routes to School. They're wondering why in school safety zones that speed reduction is optional.
Yeah, so good question. Again, it's related to the process right now at the city in terms of how they determine or how they change speed limits. So it's not just something that, you know, someone from planning or transportation could come out and just change. It has to go through a whole process through city council. So they're working to streamline that process a bit more, but right now they can't just kind of go in and slap up a 30-kilometer-per-hour sign because it's a school safety zone. It still has to go through a separate process.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Another question from London. When students are used at roadside to help with police radars, is there any issues with liability to the schools, or is this dependent on traffic in front of the school?
That question actually hasn't come up, which I'm kind of surprised about, because liability is usually one of those things that everyone is very aware of, concerned about. So far, there hasn't been any specific concern raised about it. I mean, generally we will try to pick a location, like definitely when we're picking the spot to stand with the radar gun, it's like separated from the road. Kids are not on the road doing it. Yeah, we want to be in a location that has like a safe boulevard for the students to stand on it, or if anything, they're on the sidewalk and then there's the boulevard between them and the road. I know, for example, at one of my schools, the local police were willing to come out and do that program, but then they weren't able to identify a safe location for the students to stand. So for that reason, we didn't do it. So it's definitely consideration, but I don't know about liability per se. I mean, obviously we do our best to just manage the kids and keep them safe. Generally working with a little bit older students, so not like kindergartens or grade ones, usually grade 5 and up. And just having sufficient supervision to make sure that the ratio of adults to children is sufficient, so we can, you know, make sure that they stay in a place that's safe. But that is I'm surprised actually that question hasn't come up before.
Thank you, Laura. A question from Paul in regards to cycling. Is cycling infrastructure part of the plan? How do we make it safe for students to ride to their school?
Yeah, so in terms of the school safety zones, there's not anything that's really specific, that's really cycling specific. You know, we still do look in our walkabouts and our school site audits for features of cyclability, but it's kind of it's not that it's a totally different piece, but I think that focusing on the pedestrian infrastructure is just a bit easier. So that's what we've been starting with. It's maybe more the low-hanging fruit. But there's definitely been a lot of advocacy in the city of Toronto and momentum building towards the need for better cycling infrastructure. We're terrible right now when it comes to having safe cycling routes. I myself won't cycle in the city just because I'm scared for my safety. But as part of Vision Zero, cyclists are one of the emphasis areas. So I mentioned that there's 6 emphasis areas, and school children are one of them, and cyclists are one of them. So there is, you know, some overlap between those two. So that particular emphasis area hasn't gotten as much focus as of yet. However, I suspect that that's going to start to get more attention soon, just because of the pressures that, you know, this is a real issue. But so far, it's not specifically one of the priority focus areas of the school safety zones. That's really been a lot more on walking, promoting walking.
Thanks, Laura. It's Kate here. So we have some comments from Verdeen, and they're saying that they have been working with a school for a number of years to increase safety in the flow of traffic. But despite that work and those changes, the feedback and their experience is that there's still too many cars, and that level of traffic is still making it unsafe. So their focus going forward is to be more about getting parents to change their travel behaviour and reevaluate the need to drive. Is that something that you've looked at? Do you have any resources for that?
Yeah, it's definitely something that it's very central, I think, at certain schools in particular. So there's some of my schools that I'm working with this year, there's just naturally more of a culture of walking to school. So it's a bit easier to, try to get those people who are in their cars to try to find other ways. But others, it's a very strong driving culture. And I think the built environment has a lot to do with it as well, in terms of the sort of like how we design our neighborhoods. Because I see it more in the more suburban schools, where you've got sort of these long looping street designs. And even if the school might not be that far to people's homes are not really close to other things in the neighborhood, right? Like we're looking at like a 20-minute, half-hour walk to the grocery store, not a lot of access to transit. So people are driving for that reason, right? So it's part of the lifestyle. And then many people are trip chaining as well, right? So they're dropping off their children on the way to somewhere else. So they're just going to be in their car because wherever they need to go next, they need to be in their car. So, I mean, that's difficult because I don't really know how to overcome that barrier. One thing that we've been trying to promote is the idea of walk a block or drive to 5. It's called different things depending where you are. And I found a good resource for that out of North Vancouver, where basically it just gives a guide of, some different approaches to doing something like that, where, sort of the most hands-off approach, if you don't really have anyone to go out and be a volunteer as part of the program, just sort of generally advertising to the school community the idea of, you can still get some of the benefits of walking to school. But if you really can't walk to school, it's going to be too far, you don't have time to go back home before you head off to work, just to park a little bit further away from the school and you'll still get some of the benefits of walking to school. And then in that North Vancouver guide, it kind of progressively goes from that, just very just information sending home to parents, to actually having volunteers who are at certain stations throughout the community, at say like the 5-minute or the 10-minute walking mark around the school, and that people would park there. So the school would work to identify what they want these locations to be, obviously places that have adequate parking, and then people could walk from those locations. But that's of course a lot more resource intensive, right? You need to have volunteers to keep that sustainable. But yeah, so that's been the approach that we've been trying at schools where there's a really strong driving culture. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear other ideas that people have. Another thing that we've been doing is, one of my schools in particular, it was identified that there was a lot of anger amongst the parents who get very frustrated during the drop off and pickup. They're all kind of jostling for position, and there's maybe not really good sense of community at the school in terms of parents really knowing who each other are. Everyone's just sort of an obstacle in the way. So at that school, we were focusing more on maybe kind of taking it back a couple of steps and thinking of ways to engage parents so they could get to know parents of other kids in their class, just to make sort of a bit more of a neighborhood feel to the school. So organizing things like, like coffee get-togethers, at the beginning of the school day, for those who can attend something like that, or for those who can't, then integrating it into things like a curriculum night where there's an opportunity to meet other parents in your child's class as well. So for the community building aspect, but also to potentially, connect with other people who you might be able to, maybe your kids can walk to school together, or you can take turns driving so you're not all going in your own cars to get to school together. So that was another approach that we've been trying. I don't know yet how successful that's going to be, because we just kind of got it started. But yeah, to be creative.
All right, thank you, Laura. Another question: what can be done to enforce rules towards parent behavior once they get onto school board property?
Actually, don't know. That's a really good question. Because I think it depends on the, who's working at that school. I don't know that it's enforceable by law. Like, unless someone's parking in a fire route, that's a ticketable offense. But in terms of someone just, parking somewhere where they shouldn't park, I don't know if you can ticket on private property or not. I know at some schools, principals or certain staff at the school are a lot more keen to just go out there and talk to parents and just kind of take the abuse of being yelled at if someone's getting in trouble for parking where they're not supposed to park. But I don't actually know what other repercussions there are. Like, if you can actually get a ticket, at least in the Toronto District School Board, I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Another question from Pam. York Region has been using flexible posts in the middle of school streets to visually narrow the streets. I understand Toronto has been using it also. If it is used appropriately, for instance, wider streets or parking prohibited on at least one side, are you using this for your Vision Zero strategy?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Pam, it is being rolled out in some sites across the city of Toronto, and it's part of Vision Zero. It's not specifically part of the school safety zones, though. It's a separate initiative. It doesn't mean it couldn't also be part of one of the school safety zones. I think they were trying to do it in other sites to begin with, just to kind of spread out where the infrastructure improvements were happening across the city. But yeah, I think so far the city is thinking that those have been fairly successful. So they're definitely looking to do more of that, because it is like, I personally think that would be much more effective than just a sign at the side of the road saying slow down, because it's actually, a physical thing in the middle of the road that even if you're not going to hit it, you still have to slow down to make sure you navigate it properly, right? So yeah, I'm curious to see how the evaluation of those plays out in terms of, whether speeds have been slower in those areas.
All right, thanks, Laura. This isn't a question, but more of a statement. There are researchers at the Hospital for Sick Kid Children in Toronto that are doing an evaluation on the effectiveness of 30km/h speed limit reductions. They're using comparator streets of 40 and 50 kilometers to try and advocate for lowering the speed limits, especially around school zones, from an evidence-based perspective. I know you didn't touch base on this, but you are partnered with the Hospital for Sick Children?
Green Communities is not officially partnered with the Hospital for Sick Children. I have been working with Dr. Linda Rothman on just helping her with distributing some of her surveys where the schools happen to be schools that I'm working with. I assume that that's the research team that's being referred to, but yeah, their official partnership is more with the City of Toronto Transportation Services. So they're in charge of a lot of the evaluation of the school safety zones and some of these different Vision Zero initiatives that are being rolled out to see whether or not they're actually effective, which I think is really great, because I would hate for the city or anyone to be just spending lots of money on things that look, they sound cool, but we don't know whether or not they actually work. So I'm glad that the evaluation piece has been a focus, and they're making sure that they get pre-data, like pre-intervention data, and then also post-intervention data to be able to compare.
Okay, Laura, thank you. Another question from David. Do you see the utilization of crossing guards a lot, or are there other solutions?
Crossing guards are a funny one, because there's way more demand for them in the city of Toronto than there is supply right now. And crossing guards are also being transferred over to transportation services in 2019, and it's going to become part of the Vision Zero strategy, I believe that the city is going to do its own sort of across the board evaluation of what sites should have crossing guards. But yeah, so crossing guards are, I think they're effective in terms of the perceptions of safety that people have, right? That at an intersection, they might feel more secure to let their child go that way if there is a crossing guard, because it's an adult who's there, you know, helping their child safely cross the street. In terms of other interventions, I think of what else is similar. I mean, really something like a walking school bus, I guess, could have a similar sort of effect in terms of the security, right, of knowing that your child is walking with others and is walking with a responsible adult. But those can be more difficult to set up just because it requires volunteers, whereas the crossing guards are paid.
Thanks, Laura. A question from Natalia. Where does the official school zone boundary start? 50 meters from school, 100 meters, 200?
I think, so City of Toronto is using 150 meters as their, or for their school safety zones. I'm not sure. I don't know where they got that number from, but I just know that that's the number that they use. But as I mentioned, with the extended school safety zones that they're piloting, they're testing out to see whether extending out what is counted as a school zone and where safety improvements go, whether that has impacts on you know, increasing rates of active school travel. So it's something that they're looking into. Obviously, it's more expensive to have an area that's bigger than yeah. If it's actually showing benefits, then I think it might be something that will be worth investing in, or that they'll see as worth investing in.
Thanks, Laura. So we have a question from Verdeem. Has anyone had any success with a walking school bus? I can see that in the chat we've had some communication with Vicky from Ottawa and Rob. We will be having a webinar next week, but we will be sharing more of the resources on our website, so we can share the links after.
Yeah, this is one that I would definitely want to defer to other partners. I know at the schools I've been working with, I've not had a lot of success getting a walking school bus up and running, but I know other regions have. So I think Ottawa has been one of the really great examples. So I'd like to hear more from them in terms of what's worked well for them.
We have one more final question from David. Do you see the school boards as the lead, and what role do you see the municipality play? Are you talking, I was going to confirm with David if he's talking about the walking school bus and clarify what he's referring to. Okay, so just in general for school traffic safety.
So for the school traffic management program or school travel planning, right now that's been the school boards who've been funding Green Communities Canada to actually lead the implementation. So I talked about the program in the Toronto District School Board, but the Toronto Catholic District School Board also has a separate program, but it's a kind of a parallel program. It's just not quite as closely aligned with Vision Zero. So right now it's been the school boards who've been funding it, but we've been working very closely with the city in terms of informing each other's work, but the city doesn't officially own it. But there is talk right now of the city possibly funding the school boards or funding green communities to expand school travel planning or school traffic management. So if that did happen, then it might be owned by the city, but nothing has been confirmed with that yet. It's just a discussion at this point.
Okay, thank you, Laura. That brings us to the end of our questions. If anybody has any other questions, you can feel free to email Laura or info@Green Communities Canada. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody.